A group of FBI agents infiltrates a notorious mafia club, posing as waitresses to gather crucial intel. But when a dangerous betrayal forces them into a deadly game of cat and mouse, one wrong move could cost them everything. Will they survive the mafia's wrath, or will their secrets be their undoing? Samantha Rivera adjusted her apron and scanned the dimly lit room. The luxurious club, La Luna Nera, hummed with low conversations and clinking glasses. Beneath the glamorous facade lay a dangerous truth. This was Vincenzo Rossi's domain, the ruthless leader of a sprawling criminal empire. Samantha, alongside Alexis Carter and Lena Ortiz, was here not as a waitress, but as an FBI agent infiltrating the very heart of organized crime. The three women moved seamlessly through the crowd, balancing trays and plastering on polite smiles. They exchanged subtle glances, their silent code honed over months of working undercover. Tonight felt different. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made the hairs on the back of Samantha's neck stand on end. "Table 4, Alexis whispered as she passed Samantha, her tray filled with expensive cocktails. Samantha's eyes flicked toward the far corner where a group of men sat in hushed discussion. Among them was Vincenzo Rossi himself, his piercing eyes scanning the room like a predator. His tailored suit and calm demeanor masked the violence that simmered beneath the surface. Lena brushed past them, her voice barely audible. "We need to get closer." Her tone was steady, but Samantha detected the same edge of unease that gnawed at her own confidence. They had spent weeks preparing for a moment like this, gathering crumbs of information to build a case against Rossi. But the stakes were higher tonight. Something big was unfolding. From behind the bar, Alexis discreetly slipped a small recording device under her sleeve. Her position allowed her to linger near the meeting without drawing attention. As she poured drinks, she caught snippets of conversation in Italian. Words like shipment and leverage floated to her, tantalizingly incomplete. She fought to keep her expression neutral. Samantha kept one eye on Alexis and the other on Vincenzo. He was quiet, his fingers drumming against the table. It was a subtle rhythm, but to Samantha, it felt like a countdown. His lieutenant, Marco Esposito, leaned in to speak with him, his face set in a grim mask. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't good. Lena moved to a table near the entrance, discreetly monitoring anyone who came or went. The club's opulence was a stark contrast to the danger lurking beneath its surface. Guests sipped champagne, blissfully unaware that some of the most dangerous criminals in the city surrounded them. Samantha envied their ignorance. Alexis returned to the bar, her jaw tight. "They're planning something big," she murmured as she passed Samantha. "I need more time to piece it together." Before Samantha could respond, she felt a prickle of awareness. Her gaze darted to Vincenzo, who was staring directly at her. His eyes were cold and calculating, his head tilted slightly as if dissecting her every move. She forced herself to remain calm, offering a practiced smile before turning away. "Careful," she whispered to Alexis as they crossed paths again. "He's watching." The clock ticked closer to midnight, and the tension in the room was almost unbearable. Samantha, Alexis, and Lena knew they were walking a razor-thin line. One misstep could mean the end of their mission and their lives. But as Vincenzo leaned back in his chair, his gaze sweeping the room one last time, Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that their cover had been compromised. The night wasn't over, and neither were the secrets hidden in the shadows. The tension that had simmered throughout the evening erupted in an instant. Alexis leaned against the bar, trying to look casual, her fingers twitching near the recording device hidden beneath her sleeve. She had caught something, just a few words, but enough to make her heart race. Shipment, move, unstable. She needed more, but she didn't have the luxury of time. The Mafia's business was unfolding, and every minute spent waiting increased the risk. Her instincts screamed that the moment was fast approaching. She glanced over to Samantha, who was skillfully navigating through the crowd, and then at Lena, who stood near the entrance, surveying the room. They had to get closer, hear everything. If they could just get their hands on the right information tonight, it could take down Vincenzo's operation for good. But as Alexis took a step toward the back of the room, her foot caught the edge of a chair. The sound was sharp, too loud in the otherwise hushed atmosphere. Panic rose in her chest. Did they hear? Her pulse quickened as a tall, broad-shouldered man near the far wall shifted his gaze toward her. He was one of Vincenzo's men, Franco, a loyal enforcer known for his brutish methods. His eyes narrowed, suspicious, as he began to approach. Alexis froze, her mind racing. She had to get out of sight, but there was nowhere to run without drawing attention. The seconds stretched endlessly as Franco moved closer, his gaze never leaving her. She could feel her breath catch in her throat. This is it. This is how it ends. Suddenly, Samantha appeared at her side, her posture casual, but the glint of alertness in her eyes betraying her. Without a word, Samantha stepped in front of Alexis, blocking her from Franco's view. The moment felt suspended in time, the muffled chatter around them fading to nothing. Alexis held her breath. Franco stopped in front of them, his gaze flicking between the two women. For a long, excruciating moment, no one spoke. Then he grunted, his attention shifting to the men sitting at the far corner of the room. Alexis could barely contain her relief as he turned away. "You're lucky," Samantha muttered under her breath as Franco walked off. "But we're not out of the woods yet." Lena, still near the entrance, caught their eyes and subtly nodded toward the back of the room where Vincenzo was engaged in conversation with his lieutenants. Something had changed. He was more agitated now, his sharp gaze scanning the room like he could see through the walls. "I don't think we have much time left," Lena whispered as she moved closer, her voice low but urgent. "Vincenzo's losing patience. He knows something's off." Samantha nodded, her mind racing. They needed to act fast, but how? The plan was simple. Gather intel, report back, and get out without a trace. But that was before they'd realized how tightly controlled this place was. How carefully Vincenzo watched every move. If we get too close, we're dead. At that moment, the sound of a loud crash echoed from across the room, a distraction. The chaos that followed was brief, but enough to provide an opening. Alexis rushed back to the bar, her fingers hovering over the recorder. She had to get closer again, just a few more minutes. The minutes felt like hours, each second stretching under the oppressive weight of impending danger. They could feel it in their bones now, the subtle shift in the air that signaled everything was about to change. They were no longer guests in the club, they were targets. Vincenzo rose from his seat, his back to them as he gestured toward the exit. The meeting was over, but the danger had just begun. The women exchanged a quick glance. No words were needed. They had to make their move, and fast. The moment the doors to the back room slammed shut behind Vincenzo, the atmosphere inside the club shifted. What had once been a calculated calm quickly gave way to a gnawing sense of urgency. Samantha, Alexis, and Lena gathered at a secluded corner by the service entrance, exchanging hurried whispers. "We need to figure out what's going on," Alexis said, her voice low and steady, though her pulse raced beneath her calm exterior. The tension in her eyes told another story. She had seen something, overheard something, but it was still unclear. Lena scanned the room, her sharp gaze calculating. "Vincenzo's nervous, and the way he's been moving, I think something's about to blow wide open." Samantha, ever the strategist, took a deep breath. "We can't afford to miss this. We need to get back there, closer to the inner circle. One more chance." "But how?" Alexis asked, her frustration bubbling over. "We can't just walk back in there, not after that close call." "We'll have to improvise," Samantha replied, her tone firm with resolve. "Lena, can you find a way to keep an eye on Vincenzo from a different angle? We need to know where he's going next." Lena nodded. "Already on it." As Lena slipped away into the shadows, blending effortlessly with the crowd, Alexis and Samantha stayed behind, their nerves on edge. Every moment spent waiting felt like a betrayal, like they were losing precious time. Samantha's mind raced. She knew the risks of being too bold, but the intelligence they had gathered so far was fragmented. They couldn't just walk away, they were too close. But to get any closer without blowing their cover would require precision. They'd need to be invisible, unnoticed, like shadows themselves. Samantha's gaze flickered to the staff milling around the bar. There were more than a dozen men in the back, most of them armed, all of them loyal to Vincenzo, all of them trained to spot a threat before it ever fully materialized. She couldn't afford to make a single mistake. "Let's go," she said suddenly, her voice tight but confident. Alexis looked at her, puzzled. "Go where?" Samantha didn't answer immediately. She simply walked toward the kitchen. Alexis, trusting her instinct, followed close behind. Inside the cramped kitchen, a few cooks were busy preparing food. The scent of garlic and rosemary filled the air, but the men working there barely spared the women a glance. Samantha and Alexis slipped past them unnoticed, their movements quiet, calculated. They emerged in a narrow hallway that led to a small storage room. It wasn't much. barely more than a closet filled with boxes and cleaning supplies. But it offered them the perfect vantage point. Through the narrow crack in the door, they could see the security office across the room. If they could get past the guards, they might be able to listen in on the conversations happening on the other side. But as Samantha stepped forward, she froze. A sharp sound echoed down the hallway. Footsteps. Too fast, too determined. Someone was coming, and it wasn't just anyone. It was Franco, the enforcer from earlier. Alexis stiffened beside her hand hovering near the small device still hidden beneath her sleeve. Samantha motioned for her to stay still, her eyes locking onto the approaching figure. Franco turned the corner just as they ducked behind a stack of crates. Samantha's heart thudded in her chest as she held her breath, waiting for him to pass. The seconds stretched on, an eternity of silence. Finally, the footsteps receded, and they exhaled in unison. Samantha's pulse hadn't slowed, but she knew they were still in danger. They were running out of time, and the closer they got, the greater the risk. She motioned for Alexis to follow her, and they quietly slipped into the storage room, both aware that they were moments away from being discovered. The next few minutes would determine whether they would uncover enough to stop Vincenzo, or whether they would vanish into the shadows forever. The room was dark, save for the flickering overhead light that buzzed intermittently. Samantha, Alexis, and Lena huddled together in the small, cramped storage room, their breaths shallow with the weight of the situation. Each second that ticked by felt like an eternity, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant sounds of music and muffled chatter from the main floor. But it wasn't the noise that had them on edge. It was the realization that they were now deeper in the game than they had ever been before. Lena paced silently, her mind working through every possible scenario. She had heard enough in her brief exchange with the guards earlier to know that Vincenzo was getting suspicious. His eyes had lingered too long on them tonight, and the subtle shifts in his behavior weren't lost on her. He was testing them, waiting for them to slip up. Samantha, on the other hand, was already thinking several steps ahead. "We have to move. If we don't act now, we risk being trapped here forever." "But how?" Alexis asked, her voice low, the hint of desperation evident. She felt the weight of their isolation pressing down on her. The plan had seemed simple when they'd first infiltrated the club: gather information, stay unnoticed, and get out. But now, every decision felt like it carried the potential to unravel everything. Lena, who had been quiet for a while, finally spoke. "We don't have much choice, but there's someone on the inside who might be able to help us." Both Samantha and Alexis turned to her. "Who?" Samantha asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Marco," Lena replied. "Vincenzo's right-hand man. He's been acting strange lately, nervous even. I think he's starting to question Vincenzo's decisions." Alexis raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure about that? He's one of the most loyal men in this operation." "I'm sure," Lena said. "I overheard him speaking to someone earlier. There's doubt in his voice. He's not as committed to Vincenzo's methods as he once was." Samantha thought for a moment, her mind calculating the risks. "If Marco is wavering, he might be our best shot at getting out of here alive, but we need to be careful. If we move too quickly, he'll suspect something's off." Lena nodded. "We'll have to take it slow, gain his trust." Before they could plan further, a sharp noise from outside the door sent their hearts into overdrive. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, slow and deliberate, a warning that someone was coming. The door was barely cracked open, and they had no place to hide. "Shit," Alexis muttered under her breath, her eyes darting to the narrow space behind a stack of crates. But it was too late. The footsteps grew louder, now unmistakably close. Samantha's mind raced. There was no time to run. They had no choice but to confront whoever was coming, on their terms. Lena moved quickly, her hand slipping into her jacket pocket where she kept a small, concealed weapon. She wasn't afraid to use it. They had no backup, no way to call for help. But if they played their cards right, they might just be able to bluff their way out of this. The door creaked open, and the figure that stepped inside was none other than Marco Esposito himself. His face was unreadable, his eyes sharp as he took in the sight of the three women in the storage room. For a long moment, no one spoke. "Not exactly where I expected to find you," Marco said, his voice calm but tinged with something darker, a trace of suspicion perhaps. His gaze flickered to each of them, as if searching for a crack in their disguise. Samantha took a step forward, keeping her expression neutral. "We're just getting some air," she said smoothly, forcing her voice to sound casual. It's a little crowded out there. Marco didn't seem convinced, but he didn't challenge her either. Instead, he crossed his arms over his chest. You're in the wrong place, at the wrong time. You've been poking around where you shouldn't. I suggest you leave. The warning in his tone was clear, but there was something in his eyes, something Samantha couldn't quite place. I'm afraid we can't do that, Samantha replied, her voice firm now. We need your help, Marco. His eyes narrowed. My help? He scoffed, clearly not believing her. You think you can just waltz in here and ask for help? You're in way over your heads. We know about the shipments, Alexis said suddenly, her voice unwavering. We know what you've been planning, Marco. We can help you take down Vincenzo. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marco's expression shifted just for a second, as if the weight of her words had landed. He opened his mouth, then closed it, deep in thought. You're playing a dangerous game, he said finally, his voice low. But you're right about one thing. Vincenzo's losing control. He's making mistakes, and they're only getting worse. Samantha took a step closer, her voice earnest. Then help us. We can stop him before it's too late. Marco studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Finally, he nodded slowly. All right, I'll help you, but you need to move fast. If Vincenzo catches wind of this... He didn't need to finish the sentence. They all understood the risk. Time was running out. The air in the storage room felt thicker now, charged with the tension of a deal struck in the shadows. Marco's unexpected offer was both a lifeline and a new danger. He had given them a chance to get closer to taking down Vincenzo, but the price of that help was steep. One wrong move and they'd all be dead. Meet me at the back alley in 30 minutes, Marco instructed, his voice low and serious. I'll have more information for you then. But remember, Vincenzo doesn't tolerate betrayal. With that, he turned and exited the room, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. The door creaked shut behind him, and the three agents exchanged tense glances. They had a plan now, a faint glimmer of hope, but that hope was fragile. The slightest slip-up could mean the end. We need to go, Samantha said, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed the urgency she felt. They couldn't stay here any longer. They needed to move, quickly. Lena nodded, her gaze lingering on the door as if expecting Marco to burst back in at any moment. We have to be ready for anything. If this goes south, we might not get another chance. Alexis, her hands twitching with the weight of anticipation, adjusted the recorder tucked under her sleeve. I'll stay behind for a minute, cover your exit. If anyone's watching, they'll see me. Be careful, Samantha warned, but there was no need to say more. Alexis knew the risks. They all did. With a final glance around the room, Samantha and Lena slipped out through the back door, blending into the shadows. They moved swiftly, every step measured, their senses heightened. As they navigated the labyrinth of hallways behind the club, the sounds of the busy nightclub faded into the background, replaced by the steady rhythm of their heartbeat. The back alley loomed ahead, the dim light from a flickering street lamp casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Samantha paused at the entrance, her eyes scanning the street. No sign of Marco yet. Lena lingered beside her, her gaze darting nervously between the alley and the door they had just exited. We should have brought backup, she muttered under her breath. Samantha shook her head. We can't risk it. If Vincenzo has eyes outside, backup would only make things worse. We need to handle this ourselves. Minutes passed, and still, there was no sign of Marco. The cold air cut through their clothing, sending shivers down their spines. Time was slipping away, and the longer they waited, the more vulnerable they became. Every second felt like a countdown. Suddenly, a shadow appeared at the end of the alley. Marco. Samantha stepped forward, her expression unreadable. You're late. Marco's face was tense, his eyes darting over his shoulder as if to ensure he wasn't being followed. I had to make sure I wasn't being watched, he said quietly, his voice tight with anxiety. Vincenzo's men are everywhere. It's getting harder to move around without drawing attention. Lena's eyes flickered toward the street. What do you have for us? Marco hesitated before reaching into his coat and pulling out a small folder. He passed it to Samantha, his fingers brushing hers briefly. This is everything. The shipment details, the plans for the next move. If you're going to stop him, you need to act fast. Vincenzo's going to make a big play soon. You'll be too late if you don't move now. Samantha opened the folder, scanning the papers inside. The information was exactly what they needed. Detailed schedules, locations, and even names of the people involved in the operation. This was the break they had been hoping for. But just as she was about to speak, a loud metallic noise echoed from behind them, a car door slamming shut. "Shit," Lena whispered, her hand instinctively going to the concealed weapon at her side. Before Samantha could react, a dark figure emerged from the shadows. A man, tall and imposing. His face was partially obscured by a cap, but there was no mistaking the hard glint in his eyes. Franco. "I knew something was off," Franco said, his voice cold. "Marco, you've been playing both sides." Samantha's heart sank. They had been compromised. Marco had led them straight into a trap. "You sold us out," Lena spat, her body tensing in preparation for a fight. Marco's expression faltered for a moment, the cold facade cracking. "No, I didn't. I'm trying to help you." Franco smirked. "Help them? You're either incredibly stupid or you think you can still play the game. Either way, it's too late." The tension in the air was palpable. Samantha's mind raced as she considered their options. Fight their way out? Too risky. Run? Even more dangerous. But they couldn't just stand there. Before she could make a decision, the sound of more footsteps reached their ears. Heavier, more deliberate. Vincenzo's men were closing in. They were trapped. The alleyway was closing in on them, the walls now feeling far too tight as the footsteps grew louder. Marco's face was ashen, his usual bravado replaced by a flicker of panic. He glanced back and forth between Franco and the approaching threat. Samantha could sense the desperation in the air, the realization that their fragile plan was rapidly disintegrating. Franco took a step forward, his hand on the handle of a gun tucked beneath his jacket. "You shouldn't have come here, Marco," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You've made a mistake." Marco's eyes darted toward the street, calculating his escape route. It was clear that he wasn't in control anymore. His attempt to play both sides had backfired, and now it looked like he would pay the price. Samantha knew this was their moment. If they didn't act fast, they would all be dead. "Lena, cover us," she whispered, barely audible above the noise in the alley. Lena immediately dropped to a crouch, her body tensed, ready for action. But as she moved, something unexpected happened. The sound of screeching tires filled the air, followed by the rumble of an approaching car. Samantha's first instinct was to duck, to retreat further into the shadows, but then the car came to a halt with a screech of brakes, and the driver's side door opened. Before anyone could react, a figure emerged from the car, stepping into the dim light of the alley. It was a man in a dark coat, his expression stern but determined. For a split second, Samantha thought he was another enemy, someone sent by Vincenzo to finish the job. But then he spoke, his voice cutting through the tension. "Move aside, Franco," the man said, his voice low and authoritative. "You're in the way." Franco stiffened, his hand still resting on his gun. "Who the hell are you?" The stranger's response was swift. Without warning, he pulled a badge from his jacket pocket and held it up, the gleam of it reflecting in the pale light. "FBI," he said simply. "Step away from the suspects." Samantha's heart skipped a beat. A federal agent? But they hadn't been expecting backup, not like this. Franco sneered, clearly unconvinced. "You think that badge means anything here? You're outnumbered." The man didn't flinch. "I don't need numbers," he said calmly. "But you do." Just as he spoke, several more figures emerged from the shadows, FBI agents in tactical gear, their weapons drawn. The situation had shifted in an instant, and now it was Franco and his men who were surrounded. Marco looked bewildered, his eyes shifting between Samantha and the newcomer. What's going on?" he stammered. Samantha, still in shock, didn't take her eyes off the new agent. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice cautious, unsure if she could trust this unexpected ally. The man smiled, his features softening slightly. "Agent Michael Hayes. I've been tracking Vincenzo's operations for months. It looks like you've been busy too." It took a moment for the words to sink in. The FBI had been watching Vincenzo for as long as they had? Had they known about their infiltration? Or had this been a coincidence? "We've been in this together all along?" Alexis asked, emerging from the shadows with a look of surprise. Agent Hayes nodded. "I was sent in to pick up the trail. The higher-ups didn't expect you to get this far, but it seems you've done most of the hard work for us." He glanced at Marco, who was still frozen, his eyes darting from agent to agent. "Marco, you've been playing a dangerous game. You made the right choice, though. Helping them might just save your life." Marco didn't say anything at first, his face a mixture of confusion and relief. The tension in the alley was palpable, but now the danger had shifted. They were no longer the ones at risk of being taken down. Franco, who had been so certain of his position, was now on the defensive. The agents moved in, securing the perimeter and quickly taking control of Franco and his men. It happened so fast, it was almost surreal. "You can arrest me, but it won't stop Vincenzo," Marco said, his voice filled with reluctant resignation. "He's already planning the next phase. It's too late to stop him now." Samantha stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean? What's he planning?" Marco looked over his shoulder at the group of agents and then back at Samantha. "He's moving the shipment to a new location, somewhere no one can trace it. If you don't act fast, you'll lose him for good." Agent Hayes spoke again, his tone firm. "We've got this. You've done your part. Now let us finish the job." Samantha hesitated, glancing at Alexis and Lena. The FBI had their own plan now, but she wasn't ready to walk away, not yet. Not when Vincenzo was still out there, his empire intact. "I'm not done," Samantha said, her voice resolute. "We'll finish this. Together." Agent Hayes raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "Your call, but you're not alone anymore. Let's take Vincenzo down." The mood in the alley had shifted dramatically. The tension that had once been suffocating was now replaced by a tense alliance. The FBI agents, led by Michael Hayes, quickly took control of the situation, securing the perimeter and arresting Franco and his men. But as the dust settled, Samantha, Alexis, and Lena couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. Vincenzo's operation was still intact, and the clock was ticking. As the FBI agents moved the prisoners into the back of the van, Hayes approached the three women. His expression was serious, but there was a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "You did well tonight," he said, his voice steady. "But this isn't over. Vincenzo's not going to stop just because a few of his men were arrested. We need to hit him where it hurts." Samantha nodded, her mind already spinning with the possibilities. She knew they had to act fast. They couldn't afford to let Vincenzo regroup or slip away again. He was too dangerous, too unpredictable. "We have the shipment details," Alexis spoke up, holding up the folder Marco had given them. "But we need to get to the location before Vincenzo moves everything. If we're too late, we lose our chance." Lena, still on edge, paced slightly. "And how do we know Vincenzo isn't already onto us? He's a master at hiding his tracks. Even with this information, we might be walking into a trap." Hayes looked at her, considering her words. "You're right, we can't rush in blindly. But we've got one advantage: Vincenzo's arrogance. He's so confident in his position that he's let his guard down. We can use that against him." Samantha raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Hayes leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "We're going to feed him a lie. We're going to make him think we don't know the full story, that we're still in the dark. That's how we'll get close enough to him. He won't expect us to outmaneuver him this time." Alexis frowned. "That's a risky move. If he catches on, we won't let him catch on," Hayes interrupted, his tone sharp. "We'll make sure the misinformation gets to his people through the right channels. We're going to create doubt within his ranks, make them question his decisions. It's time to sow chaos within his organization." Samantha thought for a moment. It was a dangerous strategy, but it might just work. If they could fracture the loyalty among Vincenzo's men, they could exploit the cracks in his empire. But it wouldn't be easy, and it would require precision. "How do we even get to him with the lie?" Samantha asked, her mind already racing through the steps. "He's been watching us closely. He knows we're not just waitresses." Hayes smiled slightly. "That's where you come in. You're the ones who've been in the lion's den this whole time. You've earned their trust, at least some of it. You can use that to your advantage. We'll plant the seeds of doubt in their minds, make them think we're still far from the truth." Lena frowned. "And if they don't believe it, then we'll make them," Hayes said, his voice cold with determination. "We'll make sure they start questioning everything. You've all seen the way Vincenzo's men react when they start feeling uncertain. We'll push them to that point." Samantha felt a spark of resolve. It was risky, but it was the best option they had. If they could destabilize Vincenzo's operation, they might just have a chance to take him down once and for all. "I'm in," Samantha said firmly. "Let's get this done." The plan was set into motion quickly. While Hayes and the other FBI agents worked to set up their own operation, the three women focused on the task ahead, feeding Vincenzo's men the carefully crafted lies that would send ripples of uncertainty through his organization. Alexis and Lena made their way to a nearby cafe, a known haunt for some of Vincenzo's lower-level enforcers. They had to act casual, blend in, and plant the seeds of doubt without drawing attention. Samantha remained in the alley, coordinating the effort and keeping an eye on the surveillance teams. Inside the cafe, Alexis and Lena took their seats at a small table, pretending to peruse the menu. But their eyes were sharp, their every movement calculated. They were there to stir the pot, to make sure that Vincenzo's men began to wonder whether everything they had been told was the truth. "I heard they've already moved the shipment," Lena whispered, as a group of men entered the cafe, clearly looking for someone. Alexis caught their attention with a casual remark. "I heard the boss isn't even at the meeting anymore," she said, her voice just loud enough to be overheard. "They've already changed the plan. It's all shifting. The men who were supposed to be in charge of the move, they've been replaced." The words were carefully chosen, the timing precise. They planted the seeds of doubt, letting them spread among the men who were listening. As they spoke, they let their eyes flicker toward the agents sitting across the room, giving them a brief nod. Outside, the rest of the agents were ready. The trap was set. As the hours passed, the results were immediate. Agents reported seeing Vincenzo's men growing increasingly agitated, their behavior more erratic, whispers spreading like wildfire. Some of them had already started asking questions, the cracks in their loyalty becoming more and more apparent. It was working. But the real test would be when Vincenzo found out. The disarray within Vincenzo's ranks was growing. Whispers filled the air, and the once tight loyalty of his men began to fray. Each question raised, each doubt sown, fueled the tension. The plan was working, but it was fragile. Samantha watched the chaos unfold from a safe distance, her heart pounding. She knew that Vincenzo wouldn't tolerate betrayal for long. His paranoia would drive him to take drastic measures. And when he did, it would be violent. The moment she had feared came faster than expected. A call came through. Lena had been captured. "They're using her as leverage," Alexis said, her voice tight with frustration. "They want us to show ourselves." Samantha felt a rush of urgency. This was their breaking point. The mission had always been risky, but now they were playing with fire. She turned to Hayes, who was already preparing for action. "We either rescue Lena now, or we finish the job without her. We don't have both options." He nodded grimly. "We'll move in fast. But we have to be smart. We can't let this fall apart." They had no time left. The clock was ticking, and Lena's life hung in the balance. The tension was suffocating as Samantha, Alexis, and Hayes prepared for the final confrontation. The information they had gathered was invaluable, but now it all came down to one decision: save Lena or take down Vincenzo. The FBI agents moved in quickly, but Samantha's mind raced. Lena was out there, and every second counted. They had no time for hesitation. "We have to do this now," Alexis urged, her face determined. "If we wait, it'll be too late." Samantha gave a sharp nod. "We go in fast and hard. We can't afford to make any mistakes." They stormed the hideout where Lena was being held, the sound of their boots echoing through the quiet warehouse. The guards were surprised, but not enough to prevent the agents from overpowering them. They had the advantage now. Vincenzo's empire was crumbling from within. As they reached the holding area, Lena's figure appeared, bound but defiant. "You came," she whispered, relief flooding her eyes. But there was no time to rejoice. The real danger was just ahead. Vincenzo and his men had set a trap, hidden explosives rigged to go off if they breached the compound. "This is it," Samantha muttered, eyes steely. "Time to end this." The explosion rocked the warehouse, its deafening blast sending shockwaves through the building. Dust and debris filled the air as Samantha, Alexis, and Hayes dove for cover. The world around them blurred, but the mission was clear. They had to finish what they started. Lena, though disoriented, managed to push herself up, her hands still bound but her spirit unbroken. "We need to move," she urged, her voice barely audible over the chaos. Samantha motioned for the team to advance, and they pushed forward, inching through the smoke-filled hallways toward Vincenzo's last known location. The end was near. They had the upper hand. Vincenzo was cornered, his back against the wall. The once powerful crime lord looked more like a frightened animal now. Samantha's gun was steady, but there was no triumph in her eyes. Only the somber realization that this chapter of their lives was coming to an end. "Vincenzo Rossi, you're under arrest," Hayes declared, his voice firm. The man's defiance shattered, and he was quickly subdued. The FBI had won. Hours later, the agents stood outside, the dawn breaking in the distance. They had dismantled a criminal empire, but the weight of their sacrifices was not lost on them. "This is just the beginning," Samantha said softly, her eyes on the horizon. A new mission awaited. In a world where deception, danger, and betrayal lurk around every corner, the agents had to rely on more than just their skills. They had to trust each other completely, knowing that one wrong move could mean the end. The story teaches us that the greatest challenges come not from external enemies, but from the choices we make when we're faced with pressure, fear, and the unknown. So, how would you have acted in their shoes? Would you have been able to navigate the treacherous path, or would fear have led you astray? Click the video on the screen now to continue your journey of self-discovery and see how your own decisions might shape your future. Don't forget to subscribe and join us for more adventures that challenge your mind and heart. Keep learning, keep growing, and we'll see you in the next video.